All right. Let me see if we are streaming now. I believe we are. All right. Well, good evening, everybody. It's February 21st, 2022. My name is Chris Newberg. I'm here on behalf of the Michigan Music Alliance, and I am the moderator for tonight's B-side session, which is about capturing royalties. Tonight, we have two panelists with us. We have Laura Trahan and Shane German. Lauren is out in California. She is from Killphonic Rights. She's got a whole big CV and repertoire of music experience. We'll let her explain that. Shane German is the program director at WYCE here in Grand Rapids. He's also got considerable experience in publishing and royalty collection, including but not limited to working at Sound Exchange, which is a company we're going to be talking about tonight. Without any further ado, maybe we can have Lauren introduce herself, and then Shane can follow right after.
Hey everybody, my name is Lauren, and as Chris mentioned, I work with a publishing administration company called Killphonic Rights based in Los Angeles, California. So we specialize in collecting performance and mechanical royalties all around the globe, doing direct registration. So that's my current gig, doing A&R for that company. Shane, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Shane German. I'm currently the music director at WYCE 88.1 FM in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Prior to moving to Grand Rapids, I had extensive work experience in Washington, D.C. at a performance rights organization called Sound Exchange, which we will get into later. I also was the head of artist and label relations for Believe Digital, which is a European digital distribution company, very similar to like the Orchard and TuneCore, things of that nature. And kind of launched their New York division to work with iTunes and Spotify for music placements and things of that nature. And I'm also a retired musician and have shared the stage with many artists like Bright Eyes and Tegan and Sarah, among many others. So I do have extensive knowledge, and I'm happy to share my knowledge with you so that you can get the tools that you need to be a professional recording artist.
Great. Thank you very much. Well, so today's session is about capturing royalties. The word capture makes sense. Royalties, it can be kind of a confusing word. Did either one of you maybe want to explain what royalties are, very generally where they come from, and maybe that'll help inform us why we're talking about it here tonight?
Yeah, I can jump in here. I mean, royalties on the largest scale, biggest picture are really just revenue you earn on your copyrights. So as somebody who writes and records music, you own the songs and the recordings, and royalties are what you get paid for those songs and recordings.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so we hear about royalties, on the outside layer of the music industry, whether we're music fans or whether we're just kind of average Joes, and the idea of a royalty makes sense. And I know that royalties apply in different industries as well, but when we're talking specifically about music, Shane, can you maybe, and then Lauren, you can jump in as well, maybe tell us about the different kinds of royalties that a musician who's maybe kind of starting out, maybe releasing a few albums, a few songs, might expect to try to capture or receive?
Yeah, sure. The first thing that you want to do for any recording artist is, once you've recorded that material, you want to register the copyright of that. That's your intellectual property work. That's your sound recording. So you want to decide how you want your copyrights to be represented. And it's typically by deciding which PRO you want to go to as a songwriter. And that would be ASCAP, BMI, or CSAC. They're going to handle your copyrights in your songwriting terms. There's also an additional copyright, which is the copyright of the sound recording copyright. So basically the master sound recording is also yours too if you go into the studio and record a CD. That is your sound recording copyright as well, in addition to the copyright of the publishing and the writing of the song. So there's multiple copyrights here that you need to consider.
Yeah, so just to recap, Shane is exactly right. There's 2 copyrights when you write and record a song. The first one, when you write a song, is what we call the composition. That is a copyright in and of itself. You can have many recordings of one composition, but that is the composition. Lyrics, melody, that's what that is. And then the second copyright is the sound recording itself. So for most of the independent artists out there who are writing and recording their own original music, you are the owners of 2 different copyrights for that work.
Okay, so basically, let's say that we got a duo. We got 2 people writing a song together. One person's got a guitar, and they write all the music, like the chords and the structure of the song. And then you got somebody sitting next to them that writes all the lyrics. When we talk about these 2 different copyrights, we're talking about sort of the lyrical content, something that can be transcribed into writing, and then you also got the music, like what you hear. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I would say what would be written on a sheet of music. So it can include notes, it can include, chord structure and that kind of a thing as the composition alongside the lyrics. And then the second copyright is actually the recording of it. So the WAV file, the MP3 file would be the sound recording.
Okay. Now, when we talk about different kinds of royalties that an artist might collect, I know like we have terms like mechanical, performance, we've got, master royalties, neighboring rights, sync royalties. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of royalties out there. Can one of you maybe explain maybe the entire breadth of those royalties, and then we can get into more detail as to each, what each one of them does and where you can try to collect it?
Lauren, do you want to take the first part of that?
Yeah, sure. So there are, I would say, 4 core types of royalties that average independent artists should be concerned with collecting. On the publishing side of things, there are the performance royalty and the mechanical royalty. The performance royalty is a little self-explanatory in that it is paid out every single time a composition is performed. So if you're playing a live show, or if the song is being played on, at a venue, in a store, or whatever, that would be a performance royalty that you would collect. And then mechanical royalties are paid whenever the composition is duplicated. So anytime a song is streamed is considered duplication. This is like part of like the modern industry, right? Because these royalties came about back when, before streaming. So originally it was every time you copied a CD, every time you copied a sheet of music. Before that, that was when a mechanical royalty was paid. Now streaming counts, every play counts as a sort of duplication of the digital file. So that's all earning mechanical royalties on the composition, on the song itself. On the sound recording side, it's the same thing. There's neighboring rights royalties, which are paid out whenever a sound recording is performed or played publicly. And then the artist royalties are paid out anytime the song is duplicated, anytime the sound recording is duplicated. So again, it's another royalty anytime a sound recording is streamed, anytime it's digitally downloaded, anytime it's on a CD, you also get that artist royalty on the sound recording side. So that's sort of like the general overview of royalties that you should be paying attention to.
And then on the performer side, if you're like, say you're really more of a cover artist, or you decide to do an album of covers, because of the Digital Millennium Music Copyright Act, which I think was passed in like 1998, I could be wrong on that year, but we were entering into a new digital realm. So the Copyright Office decided that in this new digital space, that non-interactive streaming services such as Pandora, your internet radio services, anything that's streamed online, the performer gets a performance royalty for that, even if they didn't write the song. So there is an additional revenue stream that's available for you just as a performer when your music is played on these non-interactive streaming services, such as Pandora, in these internet radio services. WYCE, we have our terrestrial output of what we're putting on a terrestrial signal, but we're also streaming our radio on the internet via our app and our website. So that would entail a streaming radio service, which would include a performance royalty for you just as a performer, even if you didn't write the song. There's also an additional royalty that's available for you within a streaming landscape if you own the sound recording, the master sound recording. The way that it's broken down is a royalty is broken down at 50% of that royalty goes to the master rights holder. 45% of the royalty goes to the performing artist. And then there's an additional 5% that's taken out for non-featured artists, such as session players, background singers, things of that nature. You're finding more and more in terms of like song titles will say featuring J-Lo or featuring Jay-Z. It's important that you're putting those featured credits on there so that you are entitled to a featured artist royalty rather than a non-featured artist, which would be someone like a background singer, because that will ensure a more fair distribution of the performance royalty to both featured artists on the sound recording, if that makes sense.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much. And I mean, I think maybe for our listeners out there, it makes sense to explain that if this sounds extremely complicated, it's because it is. and it's because it's kind of stepping out of my moderator shoes for a minute. It's the law that governs this. It is that Digital Millennium Copyright Act. Before that, it was the original Copyright Act that was in place before World War II. Now, either one, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding about publishing as a term and as a function and a practice, it dates back to a time where you couldn't even sell recorded music. It was about selling sheet music. Yeah. And so perhaps counting the number of sales and being able to generate revenue that you could pay a royalty on was quite a bit more simple than trying to find the distinction between whether it's an interactive stream or a non-interactive stream, whether it counts as a reproduction or a performance. It's tough these days. But I understand that we have a lot of services that are available to help us collect these royalties. I don't think that it makes sense to jump into it right now. I do want to touch on, I think the distinction between a performance royalty, well, maybe it doesn't make sense, but Lauren, can you maybe talk about the distinction between a performance royalty and a neighboring royalty as, in the internet age here?
Yeah, so, performance royalties on both the publishing, the composition, and the sound recording side are paid for that sort of like public broadcast of whatever that might be, but it's just for different copyrights, right? So for the neighboring rights royalty, that's a performance of the sound recording, whereas the performance royalty for publishing is for the composition itself. So this is something where, if you're interested in collecting your performance royalties for publishing, you want to register with the performing rights organization. So this is going to be ASCAP or BMI to go and register with them. But you have to keep in mind that, like, if you're doing a public performance, if you're playing a show out, you should submit your set list to your performing rights organization. That's a public performance of a song that you wrote, right? So you should definitely be doing that. And I think one way that we can kind of further make the distinction between a composition and a sound recording is to talk about cover songs. Because, when you make a cover, you own the sound recording of that song, but obviously you didn't write it, so you don't own the composition. But if I were to perform a cover song out at a venue, the original writer and publisher for that song is owed a performance royalty because their song is still being performed publicly, right? You as the person covering the song, you are not responsible for paying that or figuring that out, by the way.
Yeah.
But but I just think that helps to make that distinction, right? And you still earn neighboring rights royalties on the sound recording, even though it's a cover song. And I don't know, Shane, if you want to talk about that more.
Yeah, it's a great example of this, which is a great story in pop history. But, when Whitney Houston did I Will Always Love You, and it was a huge global smash, Dolly Parton was the one that was counting all that cash. I mean, she was the one that was making all the money because she wrote the song. But Whitney Houston was able to get performance-based royalties from all of her instances of I Will Always Love You through this new royalty that's available for performance-based royalties. So that if you can just kind of think about it as well, Dolly Parton wrote I Will Always Love You, Whitney Houston made it this huge global smash. Dolly Parton really was the one raking in the money, but Whitney Houston would still get paid for it just as on a performance level. So I always use that as an example. If you ever get confused as well, I didn't write the song or whatever, you still need to register with a performance rights organization as a featured artist, because you would still be entitled to performance royalties, even if someone else wrote that song. We are one of a few countries in the whole world that does not pay performing artists a royalty when it comes to their music being played on just regular terrestrial radio. It always goes to typically the publisher and the songwriter. But that's where it's a completely different playing field when it comes to streaming services, because you are entitled to it even if you didn't write the song. So if you do register with Sound Exchange, it's free, it's open to everyone. And when you register, they have international partnerships with their sister organizations in other countries like PPL in the UK or RAP in Ireland. So there are companies just like that, and they typically will work together to exchange data, exchange monies. And if you register with a performance rights organization, they have these partnerships to where it's that money and that data can be, so you wouldn't have to sit in Grand Rapids and go, I have a hit over in London, how am I going to do this? Your performance rights organization will help you through that, because they have these reciprocal agreements when your music is being played overseas.
So to recap so far, to collect all of your performing royalties for the composition and the sound recording, you have to register in two different places. For the sound recording, it's Sound Exchange, and for the composition side, for the publishing side, that is either ASCAP or BMI.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I like the distinction, or at least mentioning, I Will Always Love You, because sometimes when we hear the term cover song, we think, oh, it's a popular song that somebody else did before, and now we're going to do it. Like I'm going to cover Don't Stop Believing. Don't do that. But but really, I think what we're talking about when we're talking about covering a song, it's about performing a song that somebody else wrote, really. And in certain markets, like the country music market, it's very popular to see, the singer of the song not being the writer, and you would never know who the writer is. It's kind of, perhaps intended to be that way. But yeah, I remember hearing a story about the guy that wrote It's 5 O'Clock Somewhere for Alan Jackson and Jimmy Buffett, and how much money he made off of that. You'd never know his name otherwise, but yeah, so good ways to make money out there in music other than actually being a performer. So now a little bit later on, I want to go into maybe kind of how to start, like if you've got an album or if you got a song, from release to collecting royalties, maybe kind of go through some of those steps. But I also think maybe it makes sense to talk about the, first, the importance of PROs and kind of what the general PROs are. And when we say PRO, I think we're referring to performing rights organization, and sort of maybe what role different types fill.
Yeah. So performing rights organization is like ASCAP or BMI in the States. And this is where you register your compositions as a songwriter and as a publisher. So when you first sign up with the ASCAP or BMI, you're assigned something called an IPI number. And this is your unique identifying code as a songwriter in all of the world. And so this is kind of like step one for if you're going to be registering compositions that you write, is you have to sign up with one of those organizations. You have to get that IPI number. You know, if you ever want to switch organizations or whatever else in the future, you can do that. But this is like step one. When you sign up with these performing rights organizations, with these PROs, you will also be asked to sign up both as a writer and as a publisher. And I think this is a piece where people can get kind of confused because it's kind of gotten muddled in this digital era and the modern landscape for the music industry. But just know that if you wrote the song and you own it, you are both the songwriter and the publisher. And part of why this is so important is because PROs pay half of the royalties to the songwriter and half of the royalties to the publisher, the person who owns the composition. So if you're only signing up as a writer, you're missing out on half of your royalties, at least. The other thing to make it even trickier is that mechanical royalties are only paid to publishers. So you could be even missing out on 75% of your royalties as a songwriter and an owner of a composition if you don't register as a publisher as well and make sure that you're collecting those royalties. And for mechanical royalties, which I know we haven't quite gotten to just yet, but the organization that you need to sign up with in the States is called the MLC. And they were formed in 2018 when some new legislation was passed that was basically to make sure that songwriters had access to their mechanical royalties because of this distinction between publisher and writers. So that is definitely another place that you should sign up for. So 3 organizations so far: Sound Exchange for Neighboring Rights, a performing rights organization, a PRO, ASCAP or BMI, and the MLC.
And data is also really important. Most songs will have a ISRC code. It's almost like a digital thumbprint, fingerprint on each song. And that's how and within that code is held all of the copyright information of the particular song. So if you can go that extra step and get ISRC codes assigned to all of your tracks, that way when it goes out into the ether, it has its own little like digital fingerprint on it so that it can be easily tracked. It's almost like a microchip on a song. And it's giving the people who read all of this data to figure out how to distribute out all of these royalties. It's basically identifying who the owner is through that ISRC code. It's easy to do. A Sound Exchange they have an ISRC database. You can get ISRC codes assigned to your songs. But I think artists really do themselves a disservice when they create song titles that are in symbols or, make it hard to read. And, while it may look aesthetically artistic, when it comes down to just bare bones data, it can really mess up where your money and your royalty allocations can go, because a computer just wants to read things apples to apples. And if it can't identify a song title because it's got weird stars and symbols in it, it kind of just gets knocked out into this black box and it just sits there. And it takes a very long time to figure out where all of this unclaimed money where it should go and who it belongs to. Chris and I were talking earlier about even using an ampersand versus the word and. Those are two different data points. So you want to make sure that when you are registering your work, you are listing every instance of the song that might be a different, situation. Same word, but a different spelling. You want to make sure that you're figuring that out, and that you're providing clean data that matches apples to apples, because we're dealing with billions and billions and billions of data files, and computers just want to read things apples to apples. If it can't, it gets knocked out into a black box and it just sits there. A good example of that would be like listing your label. If you say, if you don't have a real record label, but to release it as self-released or release it as independent, there's a whole bunch of people that do that same thing. So it's just going to sit in an independent black box. So create a label, do something that's specific to you, so that when those royalties or the master sound recording or the publishing or whatever, it's coming back to a real known entity that's not just independent or not just promotional only. You want to really kind of incorporate your compositions, your sound recordings, your ISRC codes, so that they can easily be traced back to you as the owner of them. It really will help you kind of cast a wide net and make sure you're getting everything that you're owed out there.
Yeah, this is your license to create a very cool label name and publisher name for yourself. Reminder that these will be public names, okay? Like you can go and look up in some of these databases like famous rock stars, and they will have the most absurd publishing entity names or like record label names for themselves. So they're going to be public, not embarrassing, right? But be as creative as you want to be to make something that is unique to you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think if I'm boiling down, Shane and Lauren, what you just said at the end there, what we're dealing with is basically an online database. Even if there's not a centralized database, we're dealing with numbers and letters and symbols, where if you don't get it perfectly right, or if you do it in a way that it might be confusing, you are complicating your path to collecting your royalties, essentially. So it sounds like the takeaway is be accurate, and if you can avoid perhaps using certain letters or certain symbols that might create confusion, perhaps do it. If your goal is collecting royalties. And I'm sure that there are ways around some of those issues, but you don't want to get caught up in a situation where you're waiting for a PRO to register your song or to start paying you royalties for any longer than you deserve. And then Lauren, back to the point that you made before, Shane, I think that's an important one too. And maybe the takeaway from that is, if you don't have a publisher, if you haven't signed a publishing agreement and you're releasing music that's your own, you are the publisher, correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And that's so important to know. In the same way that, like, if you are uploading the sound recording to DistroKid, you own it, you are the distributor, you're the record label. Yeah, you are the record label. Like, you're entitled to all of the royalties that the sound recording owner is paid. So definitely an important note.
Okay, yeah. So to the extent that there's any confusion out there about when you're filling out this information on DistroKid or TuneCore or wherever you might be distributing your music, if you don't have a label, and hopefully you know that, if you don't have a publishing company, you don't have to enter anything there. It's not a trick question. Okay, cool. Well, can we maybe like work through a hypothetical? I'm thinking that might be the best way to kind of talk about how to collect royalties. Let's say that I've got a band and I want to release a song, and it's going to be a pretty good song. People are pumped about it, and it's going to get plays, and we're focusing mostly on digital and streaming, because that's kind of the format these days. Now, I understand you can kind of do it yourself when it comes to distribution and releasing music. We just talked about like TuneCore and DistroKid, and there are plenty of others out there. I don't endorse any. I don't think anybody here endorses any one particular one. But can one of you maybe talk about the first step in getting your music out there, and maybe you know, whether some of these services that you use to distribute your music can help you collect royalties?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's say that you are a bedroom pop artist, solo, right? Like you in your bedroom, you wrote and recorded everything yourself, all original music. And you have this song, you want to release it. So I would say with the sound recording, you can go and release it with one of those digital distributors we talked about, like DistroKid, TuneCore, CD Baby, whatever it might be. Again, no endorsements. And when you distribute there, you will get an ISRC code. And after you have distributed there, you have your ISRC code, you have the song title, the artist name. You can register it with Sound Exchange. Having that ISRC code is important for that, right? So once you have it out with DistroKid and you have it registered with Sound Exchange with that ISRC, you're covered on your sound recording royalties side, right? And on the publishing side, you've signed up, let's say you've signed up with ASCAP. You've registered as the songwriter and as a publishing entity. You register the song name and the artist name, and you can add the ISRC there also, which will only help you. You'll get assigned an ISWC too. But then you're covered on your performing rights side. And then you want to take that ISWC, the song title, the artist name, and register it with MLC, which stands for the Mechanical Licensing Collective, by the way. I don't know if I mentioned that before. I get hung up on the acronym. So to be clear, Mechanical Licensing Collective, the MLC. And then you're mostly covered on the mechanical side, right? You sign up with your publishing entity there, you're covered. So those are like the 4 places that you want to go to register your song.
Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, and so you know, the first one you mentioned was Sound Exchange. I know we got Shane here who
Yes.
worked for Sound Exchange for a long time, and I'm sure knows the insides and outsides of it. Now, Shane, let's say that you released a song you know, a year ago, and you just got this news now that you've got to sign up for Sound Exchange. Are you still able to collect past royalties? How does that work?
Yep, they hold it for a very long time. I don't know what their term out is. It's years. I mean, and they do all sorts of things. They'll work with other organizations to see if maybe they have like data on payment information for particular publishers or songwriters. So they try every avenue they can to try to get that money out. The performance rights organizations, a good one, will be working on your behalf to make sure that they're collecting what's owed to you. So that money, if it sits there, but they also have a database. You can go in and type in your performing name or your band name, and it'll tell you if there are royalties waiting for you. You know, so you can kind of go in and you can look at radio logs to see if you've appeared on one. I think there is a minimum threshold. It might be $10 or more or something. I'm not sure what their minimum threshold is, but it's low. I mean, but you also have to remember there are thousands of internet streaming services. There's tons of ways that your music could be out there. And it's nice to have a one-stop shop, basically, who's out there collecting the data, collecting the royalties, doing all of that. All you need to do as an artist is step forward and say, hey, that's mine. Fill out the registration form, to put in your payment information. If you have an LLC, if it's a band, you know, if it's a band and you're a 4-piece, you needed to figure out as a band, you know, you would each get 25%, right? You know, so you need to figure out if the drummer only came in as a work for hire for one track. You need to figure out, does that drummer, if you paid him cash up front, does he get 25% in perpetuity of all of your royalties going forward? So you need to have these conversations. A good example is, if you have like it's Diana Ross and the Supremes, well, if it's Diana Ross, does does she get 50%, and then the two girls behind her, do they get 25? Typically it's straight down the line. It's 25 if it's a four-piece, 25% each, unless there's a different agreement in place. And producers also get, if you're going in to produce someone's record, you can get sound exchange royalties for being the producer. I think you can get it up to, I don't know what the point structure is, but I think it's around 5% on someone's performance royalties. As a producer, you'd have to sign a producer letter, and the artist signs off on it or whatever. So it's not just what's the ephemeral of what's now. It's like when your music is being streamed all over these services, it generates these royalty streams, and before you know it, you could be generating income that you just didn't know was there. You just have to figure out, if you're a solo artist, it's easy, you're 100% and you get it all. But if it's a band situation, it's typically right down the middle. Each person is a featured artist on the particular track, or it can go 100% just goes out to your LLC and you guys figure it out. But if you've got a band situation where you've got different members, like Fleetwood Mac. There's a Fleetwood Mac that was a blues-based British band in the 60s. And then in the 70s, it changed to Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham joining. But on paper, it just says Fleetwood Mac. You have to figure out, well, which Fleetwood Mac is this? And Stevie Nicks isn't going to get a royalty for a recording that was a Fleetwood Mac from the 60s that was a blues band. So even though they had the same name, so you really have to break it down on a track level, to figure out who gets that royalty.
Certainly, yeah. And I think a lot of that comes down, when we're talking about that side of collecting royalties. Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to the agreement of the band. The idea being that the label, or if there is no label, the band is going to be receiving a lot of these royalties. The songwriters are going to be receiving royalties. How do we split these up between ourselves? That's probably a completely different conversation. It would be a good one. It'd be a fun one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, everything's negotiable, and whatever you do, put it in writing somehow. Even if you're not in a place where you're going to get a formal contract together, even a text message or like an email somewhere that's searchable, saved, just have some sort of agreement for what everybody owns in a song.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've seen situations, and again, I'm the moderator, so I can't be going too far on a limb here, but I've seen situations where you got two guys sitting in a room together. One of them writes the whole song. The other one might have thrown out a couple words or might have inspired some ideas behind the song. Inspiring a song doesn't entitle you to a royalty. I mean, unless you actually contribute words or melody or something to the composition. So again, getting that agreement in place is going to help alleviate headaches later on. Of course, the biggest issue, and I guess kind of what we're here to talk about today, is getting that dollar closer to the entity than it was before. And then once it gets there, you guys can figure out what to do with it, But the biggest thing is making sure that companies like Spotify, YouTube, Pandora, radio, music venues are paying, what they need to pay to have your music performed or played in their venue or through their service. And so if we're going with this bedroom pop model, which kind of, I think might simplify it a little bit, Lauren, because we got one writer, we've got one performer, right. Perhaps we've even got one producer, and it's all the same person. And they're doing their own publishing, they got their own label. This is the person who's going to receive 100% of the royalties, presumably. So we distribute through a distribution company. They put it out there. It winds up on Spotify, Pandora, Deezer, Apple Music, all these different services. Sometimes you got people downloading it through iTunes, and sometimes you've got people streaming it through streaming services. Are the royalties different depending on how people access or utilize the music?
Yeah, actually they are. So mechanical royalties, for example, have a statutory rate for a digital download that's much higher than what you would get for streaming. So, even a streaming, like what you get paid from DistroKid for a single stream from Spotify is something like a fraction of a penny. A mechanical royalty is a fraction of that, like even smaller. than that fraction of a penny that you get paid for the sound recording, right? So it's almost nothing. And I believe that the royalty rate for a digital download is something like 4.9 cents. So that is like, you're arguably getting more money. If you're the bedroom pop artist, you're getting, much more money. You get 99 cents essentially when somebody digitally downloads your song versus the, fractions of that if you had to share it with somebody, or the fraction of a penny on a stream.
Okay, yeah, interesting.
Mhm.
And there's a conversation that I have with folks sometimes too, because like my band, Gunner and the Grizzly Boys, we started, 13 years ago, which is crazy to say, but we sold CDs to people and enjoyed doing that because that was a good way to generate revenue. But now we're in the streaming era, and it's actually, it almost kind of feels like sometimes we're double dipping, because the same people who've already bought our CDs have also downloaded our songs, and now they're paying to stream the music. And so, I think perhaps the question comes down to, for every person who downloads this, like how many times would they stream it otherwise, and which one's more viable? Either way, it doesn't. We don't really have much of a choice as musicians, I don't think, because a lot of these licenses are compulsory, which means that someone can just take our song and play it as long as they pay us what they're supposed to pay, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So like a compulsory license, if somebody covers your song, you don't really get a say whether or not they do that. That's a compulsory license. And then all of these sort of like statutory rates or these streaming rates and all these different things, different platforms have different models for it. So they all owe money. But I know that there were some pushes for like your fan for your band who pays $10 a month for Spotify. Even if they only listen to your band on Spotify, their money is not going to just you, right? It's sort of like all put in this big pot and then redistributed. And that's how a lot of royalties work. It's the same thing for performing royalties on the publishing side. Venues and restaurants and all these places are paying these big blanket license fees. And then that all goes into a huge pot, and then it's redistributed through some complex formulas to the people who are registered with those organizations, which is part of why things like submitting your set list when you perform live is so important, because you have proof that it was actually performed live rather than just being a part of that system. But yeah, it's a fun, complicated, wacky world of royalties right there, and how all of that gets generated and distributed to artists.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and there's different rates and different thing, and it depends on like independent community radio station is not going to pay the same rates as Sirius XM, it's just not going to be the same. So depending on the size of the streaming service and all of that, so it's always best to register with a PRO. They will go walk you through everything that you need to do, organize all of your sound recordings and your publishing, make sure you've got ISRC codes or those little digital thumbprints on the song, on the compositions, on the tracks. Create a label name. If you don't have one, don't use things like self-released or independent, because it's really going to do you a disservice. So they will walk you through it. I know it seems daunting, and it is. But if you can put all your ducks in a row and you get your house in order, you can feel more confident that your performance rights organization or your publisher or your sound exchange, all of these things that are there to help you, if you can keep it precise and clean and you've got everything in order, they will handle the distribution and the allocation. You don't have to worry about that. You can worry about continuing to be a songwriter and a performing artist and all of that. Don't get so overwhelmed that you just wave up your hands and say, I can't do this. There are people to help you through it. You just gotta take that step and register and make a decision as to what kind of direction you want to go and which distribution service you want to use. Once you get all of that situated, then you can focus on getting your music out there.
I will also encourage everybody to start sooner than later, because it is way easier to register like 5 songs and get your IPI, get, you know, everything set up with your 5 songs or your 1 song, and then just kind of maintain it from there than it is to work up to a catalog of 50 songs or 100 songs and then go, oh crap, now I have to organize all of this and register it and try and do back collections and, you know, make sure I'm not missing anything. So the sooner you start, the better for all of this, to kind of get used to the system, to like going through that administrative process for your career, and to make sure that you're not missing anything. I will say, like, as a publishing administrator working directly with our clients, like part of what we do is helping clear up these huge catalogs and these like mistakes or like gaps in agreements or in data. And, you know, there's literally an entire industry centered all around that. So if you're really trying to do it yourself, start sooner than later.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that's great information. You know, and I think that it might make sense to kind of go back to the self-distribution hypothetical we talked about, maybe recap that, because I think that there was some really good information there, and I want to make sure that people maybe hear it again because it might stick. So let's say that you distribute your music, you upload it through whatever service you like to use. I know some of those services offer royalty collections. That they do offer some publishing services. I would imagine there are some holes though. I mean, does it still make sense, even if you've got DistroKid or TuneCore collecting your publishing royalties, or so they say, does it still make sense to sign up with SoundExchange, you know, BMI or ASCAP or CSAC and MLC?
Yeah, so Shane, you can speak here. My understanding is that there aren't any digital distributors that collect neighboring rights royalties. Is that correct?
I don't know that definitively, but typically SoundExchange is designated by the U.S. Copyright Office to collect and distribute those royalties. And you can register those directly. When you go through a third party, they're going to take an admin rate if they do register for you. So if you had the opportunity to just register direct, when it comes to SoundExchange, you might as well. If you go through a third party aggregator, basically, they're going to take a piece of that for administering that stuff, when you could just do it yourself and get all of it.
Okay, so maybe, not to interrupt, maybe that's the distinction, because I know, like, through TuneCore and CD Baby, for example, you can check the SoundExchange box. I've always been hesitant to do so when releasing music, because it's like, why would you give me something that I can go get on my own unless you're going to take a piece of it?
It's
so
just,
if you're a true DIYer, maybe you do it yourself.
Yeah, it's just an administrative, it's just a service that they offer, but you know, that service typically is not free. You know, they're gonna take it. If it's something that you just can't deal with or whatever, and you are willing to let a third party take it over, they certainly can. But there will be an administrative cost to that for them to do that for you. Otherwise, you can just register yourself. It comes directly to you, and you've cut out the middleman.
Okay.
Yeah, and I will say on the publishing side, regardless if you check that box in DistroKid or TuneCore or not, you need to register as a writer at a minimum with a PRO, because they will never collect or distribute the writer share to you. So that piece is super, super important. And even something like publishing administration, where we are literally taking a commission, a fee on the royalties that we collect for you. It's the service of just making sure you're registered all across the board, all the different organizations on the publishing side, and like additional services there. So yeah, if you're taking that box with your digital distributor, when you're releasing your songs, it is, again, like they're taking a cut of whatever you're earning. And I know sometimes too, there can be some like hidden fees or like layers, right? So maybe DistroKid has a partnership with Songtrust, for example. So it is almost guaranteed that Songtrust is still taking their full admin fee, with DistroKid also taking a fee. And then you're getting your royalties. So If you're able to register yourself, I would encourage you to do so.
Let them do your distribution, getting your music across multiple platforms. You on the back end make sure that you directly are signing up for your copyrights and all of that, and let them get your music on the platforms. You collect the money from that.
Sure. It's the whole belt and suspenders technique, right? I
Yeah.
mean, your pants are a lot less likely to fall down if you got both on.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, cool. Well, we've only got a couple more minutes here. I kind of want to like run through just a couple notes or like quick points that I've got. And this is, I'm going to kind of base this like off of my own personal experience and like things that I've seen. Maybe you guys can like help give some input. Other royalty sources that I've seen my band receive, small checks from. Music Reports is one of them. I don't really know what that is. Maybe we can talk about that. Also, companies like AMI, the jukebox company, I understand that they pay royalties out of their own, they write their own checks for that, although they also do show up on BMI statements we receive. Are there any other, small ancillary royalty sources like that artists should be aware of?
Yeah, so I'll chime in on the Music Reports front. Mechanical royalties in the US are just kind of complicated. Elsewhere in the world, they tend to have dedicated organizations in a territory the same way that we have ASCAP or BMI that's like a little bit cleaner. So in the US, in order to collect all of your mechanical royalties, you would technically need the MLC, Music Reports, Harry Fox Agency, and YouTube, or an administrator who has an agreement with YouTube. So, it's a lot easier when you're first starting out to say sign up with the MLC. You're going to get the bulk of your mechanical royalties there, and it's a good starting place. And as you get further into it, it'll be easier to like add in Music Reports, for example. So yes, that's what I would say on that front. A couple little ancillary places. And then as far as the jukebox company goes, my understanding there is that they have also their own agreement. Like they have their own agreements with artists and their own agreements with the places that they have their jukeboxes in. And it's not like a super great deal for artists. There's one artist that I worked with that had agreed to have her music in there, was getting paid almost nothing for like thousands and thousands of plays. So I would see it almost like a marketing tool over necessarily a place where you were going to make a lot of money, but it is a thing. Yes.
Okay. Well,
Yeah,
great.
There's a question in this chat room, it looks like.
Yes.
Yeah, let me see. It's a long one. I'm going to read through it here just so everybody can see it who might be viewing this later. It says, I've got a question. I'm wondering about the journey of a song from writing to registering to production. Say you've written a song, you're registering that original song for composition, copyright / publishing, but over time, the original written material changes as it's arranged and produced. Then there are other versions recorded with featured artists and or different arrangements and instrumentation. Does it all go back to the same original song ISRC code, even if maybe some of the lyrics have changed, a verse was dropped, or a bridge was added, etc.?
Yeah, so I can jump in here and say, if you've written a song, lyrics, melodies, and you registered it, so it's already registered, it's been published in some way as that original song and composition, anything that comes after that is called a derivative work. So you are still the owner of the original copyright, but anything after is derivative. I think what you'll find if you, let's say you partner with somebody who's going to do a remix of it, right? And they just take the chorus, or they really switch up, like they make it a pop dance song when it was a indie rock song to start with, or something like that. A lot of times people will share some of the publishing with them sometimes, maybe just a smaller cut. So like if you own 100% of the publishing, and they're a really big remixer and they're taking and like really, changing the song in some significant way, making it a derivative work, maybe you give them a cut of the publishing. That's possible. Maybe you would just share on the sound recording side, since that's really the biggest piece that's being changed. But technically, by definition, it would be a derivative work. So that said, if you work with this remixer, you decide to give them 20% of the publishing, you would make that a new registration with your performing rights organization.
Yeah, so I think when it comes down to the question about the ISRC code, the ISRC code identifies a specific sound recording, correct? Not the underlying composition.
Right.
Right. So it would be different sound recordings. And even when you re-register the remix, where they're only getting publishing on that remix, right? On that different version of the song, not the original version. So even in that instance, you would get on the composition side, when you register with ASCAP or BMI, you get an ISWC. So for the writer's code rather than the recording code. But yeah, separate registrations.
And you're seeing a lot of artists now re-recording their catalog because their label owns the masters, like Taylor Swift is doing it. A lot of people are doing it, and they won't release those masters to the artist. So the artist goes in and re-records the catalog, and those new re-recordings are then their own new ownership. So you're seeing that happen more and more and more and more, because these some of these label contracts are like ironclad, and they own them forever. And the artists are kind of taking back control of their work by re-recording them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that definitely speaks to the strong distinction between the composition and the sound recording, and how you kind of have to train your mind to understand how they're two different things, and certainly they're related, but for royalty purposes, they're definitely two different things, and also for maybe contractual or copyright reasons too. And
then the ISRC codes that are embedded in that re-record, because the song title is the same. So if you're just looking at apples to apples, and if you're not digging down deeper, it looks like it's the same title. Which is it? Is it the original recording that was put out on the major label, or is it the re-record that was independently released? ISRC codes will help clarify that.
Great. Well, we're getting close to the end of the time here. There's one more thing that was on our list that I want to touch on quick, and it's kind of going to be more of me summarily dismissing it from the conversation. But the talk about sync royalties, and that's SYNC, not SINK. It's not a kitchen sink. It's synchronization. The reason that I don't think it's that important to talk about today is because it's more of a matter of contract, right? It's more of a matter of an agreement between the rights holder and the person utilizing the song. This would be like if your song is going to be on a TV show or on any video that's published. It kind of falls outside of perhaps the scope of what we've been talking about today with sound exchange and PROs, although there's some relationship there. But is there anything wrong about that? Is there anything that maybe we should touch on quick?
I mean, I think like what we've talked about today is sort of like these larger entities and ways that you're collecting money that's being generated that is owed to you automatically just for putting out music, right? Synchronization licenses are when you synchronize audio and visual works. So to specifically in that realm, it's a unique situation, and every single instance of that is negotiable and negotiated. So if your movie is going to get put in an ad for social media, that could be a few $100 sync. If it's going to get put in an Apple commercial, that could be a 6-figure sync. And so half of that fee is paid to the people who wrote the song and own the publishing of it. It's paid to the people who own the publishing. The other half is paid to the people who own the sound recording that they're going to use. So those fees every single time are negotiable, every single time that happens. And there's an entire industry, entire careers that are just in that special case of licensing.
I did a TV show. I was an actor in my former life. And there was, when the episode originally aired, it was one song, but anytime you see it in repeats, it's a completely different song. And it almost sounds like the original song. And that's because whoever allowed them to use it in the first run paid a certain amount of money. And the the sync licensing people are like, well, we can't afford to pay that for all of the DVD releases, the streaming, da da da. So they do it for the one time, and then they replace that sync license with a song that's similar sounding in that nature. Or like Freaks and Geeks was another great example. They used all of these great music when the series was out, and it took them a long time to get the rights to get all of that music queued up for any kind of DVD release or streaming service on Netflix, because that sync license, they can add up, and if you don't spend the money on it, or if the artist doesn't release it, they have to find ways to utilize that as the soundtrack in a different way. So sync licensing is a very interesting thing. There are, like you said, Lauren, there's a whole industry around it. There are people who create songs just for television shows because they need something that sounds like this, sounds like that, because what they really want, they can't afford. It's not in their budget for those particular sync licenses. It's really fascinating.
So maybe the takeaway about sync licenses, if we're going to end it at that, is they're complicated. It's not automatic. It's not perhaps governed by federal law. And maybe if you have questions about it, that you should contact an expert or wait for another B-side session.
Yeah, they could definitely be its own session. I mean, it's something where, like, if you're a songwriter and musician, you have to be like actively pitching that to music supervisors, which is the name of the role that puts music into film and TV. And if you're making a visual work and want to license music from somebody else, then you have to track down the contact information for publishers and whatever, and negotiate on that individual level for anything like that. So
yeah. And so it's more like you actually can negotiate what you're paid rather than just accept what somebody's told you have to accept.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, nice. All right, great. Well, I think perhaps if we're gonna do like a 30,000 foot aerial view of what we talked about today, using the hypothetical of somebody who wrote their song, performed their song, produced their song, distributed their song, the idea is that you upload it, you distribute it as many places as possible, as many places as you want to. It sounds like we talked about then immediately going and signing up for Sound Exchange, entering the song into your Sound Exchange repertoire, and attempting to collect royalties that way. Having a PRO, which would be either BMI, ASCAP, or CSAC, signing up with one of those and registering your songs with that to collect a different kind of royalty. And then signing up with the MLC, which Lauren, you mentioned the name, and that is
Mechanical Licensing Collective.
The Mechanical Licensing Collective, to collect your mechanical royalties. And with those steps, it sounds like you're pretty well on your way to collecting royalties as a DIY musician. Great.
Yep.
Is there anything I missed? Any last points you'd like to make?
No, I mean, I think that's really it. You covered it.
Okay, well, thank you. You covered it. I just summarized it in about 30 seconds. Well, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us here. This was great. I learned a lot. I hope that the people watching learned a lot. It's going to be one of those that maybe we go back and rewatch and take, find some new informational tidbits, the second time we listen. But I really do thank you both for joining us here tonight, and round of applause. And take care.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Lauren, great seeing you.
Good to see you too.
We'll see you soon.